This is Terms of Reference podcast number 168.
One of the interesting aspects of innovation is that sometimes you have a gut feeling about what it is, but it is actually a matter of fact that it's as much about the team and the people as it is about the idea itself.
This is Terms of Reference. I'm your host, Stephen Laddick. When I think about innovating for food, well, I have to admit I'm usually focused on how my family can make dinner something special. Finding a way out of the rut of eating the same food as my children, it's a pain point that I'm constantly trying to work out. But I know that we're not here to talk about how I can become an Iron Chef. And indeed, in today's 168 Terms of Reference podcast, we're here to explore how innovation can be applied to making sure people don't go hungry. My guest for today's show is Bernhard Kowatsch. He's the head of the Innovation Accelerator at the World Food Program. The accelerator was launched in 2016 to identify, support, and scale high-potential solutions to hunger worldwide. This is a really fun conversation where Bernhard and I talk about how blockchain can be applied to combating hunger, what it takes to run an accelerator, why we need to always remember to think of innovation as more than just tech, and much, much more. I spoke with Bernhard in Munich. But before we get started, a quick word from our sponsor.
The Terms of Reference podcast is sponsored by International Solutions Group, helping to improve the social impact of governments, UN agencies, NGOs, and companies for more than 10 years. Visit ISG online at www.theisg.com.
Hello, Bernhard. Thank you so much for being on the Terms of Reference podcast today.
Hi, Stephen. It's a pleasure to be here, and thank you for the opportunity to talk to you today.
Bernhard, where do we find you sitting today?
Right now, I'm in our office of the World Food Program Innovation Accelerator in Munich, in Germany. And so this is where I'm joining you from.
Excellent. I'm surprised you're not on vacation because everybody else in my universe is on vacation. We're kind of coming up on the end of July here. So I'm glad that we caught you when you're still in the office. But you kind of stole my thunder there a little bit. You are the head of the Innovation Accelerator at the World Food Program. Why don't we start like we always do with you just sort of telling us about what is the Innovation Accelerator and why World Food Program has one?
Yeah, so the World Food Program is the world's largest agency fighting hunger. So we provide food assistance to about 80 million people in 83 countries. And that's spanning across the globe. So it could be anywhere in emergency situations, either could be like hurricanes, typhoons, could be conflicts like in Syria, or also like sustainable food help, like lifting people out of hunger. And so the Innovation Accelerator really exists to identify and support great innovations that can help us reach a world without hunger. And so we are modeled like any other private sector startup accelerator. So we're looking for teams and entrepreneurs that are working on either a startup or an innovation idea that can contribute to ending hunger. And it could be in any shape or form, ideas that help like either in fighting hunger in emergencies, provide food, or it could be like new business models to actually provide jobs that lift people out of hunger.
Now, I know, and it's clear, it's on your website, you guys just celebrated your first anniversary. I'd like to know who or what or how did this come about? Was it, WFP woke up one day and as a collective said, we need to have one of these accelerators, or was this your brainchild? How did this get started in a large bureaucratic organization like WFP?
So WFP, we've always actually been really good in getting innovations done. And this is, for me personally, a reflection of like just the work that we're doing as an organization. And like it was actually something that also our executive management at the time realized, saying, well, we're good in actually getting innovations to scale across countries, but we actually don't have any systematic way to identify or support those. So like to a certain extent, it wasn't as systematic as it could be. And so they came to that conclusion, well, maybe we should do something. And at the time, I then, because of a previous initiative that I co-founded called Share the Meal, I actually also had this experience of running through a startup accelerator myself. So I developed this concept of why don't we actually use a startup accelerator in the social impact world? And this is how we started the whole World Food Program Innovation Accelerator, and looking into like where would we actually base that, then came to Munich in Germany across multiple different things, looking, okay, could we be in an innovation ecosystem and how could we actually run this?
Excellent. Thanks. So did you, if I got it right, so when you were with Share the Food, was that a program inside WFP and then you came into WFP, or are you a longtime WFP person?
So originally, I actually was working in private sector as a management consultant for a company called the Boston Consulting Group. And I then started up the World Food Program's internal management consulting team. Then together with a friend, Sebastian Stricker, we actually co-founded Share the Meal. It's a fundraising app. So on your phone, you can tap a button and you can share your meal for 50 cents to feed a child for a day. So we did this, and that actually became part of the World Food Program then again. And then now, after that, I started up the accelerator.
So I want to just sort of get some meat on the table here. You've been in existence for about a year now. What are the 1 or 2 or 3 projects that you're most excited? You're either incubating right now or that have already come out and are spun up and working right now?
Yeah, no, it's great that you're asking, because so in the operation as an accelerator, we obviously started looking for both projects that have already been in existence or new ideas. So what we've discovered now, there's a couple of projects that I'm really excited about. One is what we call building blocks. It's using blockchain technology, so the distributed database system, to make like vouchers and cash transfers to refugees or hungry people more efficient and more secure. We just did a pilot in Jordan with 10,000 refugees in a refugee camp, and we're using blockchain to actually save banking fees and make the transfers more secure and also at the same time more transparent for us. And so that's something, for instance, we're really excited about, because these bank transfers for cash-based transfers can be in a range of 1.5% to 3.5%. And one of our finance officers, he came up with this idea, and like after 6 months, we were able to actually launch this blockchain-based solution. And this is now being scaled up in all over Jordan and beyond. So that's one specific example.
On the show, we've had multiple guests say blockchain is the innovation of the future that they think can have an impact. So it's great to hear of a real tangible example.
A second example that I'm really excited about is called Tech for Food. And what we do there is really taking like the training and models of the humanitarian world and the development world to the 21st century. So historically, and like when you look into the work that we're doing as the World Food Program, right now we provide food assistance to about 4.5 million Syrians inside of Syria and 1.5 million Syrians outside of Syria. And like what we've historically been doing also is then you provide food, you provide cash to people so they actually can continue to live their lives and actually be able to sustain themselves. And so one aspect then is actually training programs so that people can get equipped for the future. So either if they're moving back or if where they are, even if they're a refugee, to be able to actually have a meaningful life and be part of the community and be able to earn money. So we actually then did, and this is why we call it Tech for Food, because we did a 6 weeks training program where we actually do a digital task training, where then in this case it would be food insecure Lebanese people and Syrian refugees in Lebanon that we trained in that. And after these 6 weeks, they were able to actually what's usually called small task outsourcing, like small technical IT's work, that it could actually freelance on the global market, and no matter where they are based, could contribute to like the global tech community and actually have a meaningful job no matter where they are. And so that's another project that I'm excited about.
So let's go backwards. So when you say that they're able to sort of go out into the market, I mean, are these people hopping on Outsource? Are they hopping on Fiverr? These kinds of things, and sort of raising their hand and saying, look, I'm like any other contractor out there?
Well, so ideally, that would be a great start. Obviously, what we did is we specifically targeted some of the most vulnerable people, so people who may have been dropped out of school for 4 to 5 years, like 19, 20 years of age. Obviously, they will have had some basic education before that, but like specifically trying to find opportunities for people who otherwise would not have had that opportunity or may not have had a formal university degree, for instance. So, and like specifically for them, if it's possible, and I think this is an avenue that we're further exploring right now. We are currently scaling this up also in Iraq. And what we are trying to do is actually finding that sustainable model that can replicate itself and actually spread to not only hundreds of people or thousands of people, but tens of thousands of people.
So I want to go back to the blockchain example. I think it would be a great way for you to help us understand how the accelerator works at World Food Program. So could you take us through, like, first, how did you discover the blockchain example? Is it internal? Was it external? And then what kind of process do they go through? I mean, do you provide them funding? What kind of technical support? And then when do you kick them out? And at what point do you say, hey, Flybird, be free kind of thing?
We have a 5-step process in the Innovation Accelerator. So the first is what we call innovation challenges. We first started off doing those challenges just inside the World Food Program. And just earlier in the year, we did our first ever global impact challenge together with Singularity University, where we were looking specifically for external startups and NGO and academia teams. And so the first step is always the identification, and people can also apply on our website to become part of our program. The second step is then we organize in Munich 1-week innovation bootcamp. That innovation bootcamp is a high-intensity training on both lean startup, human-centered design type of applying these innovation principles to your project or startup. But then also specifically for external startups, training people on how is life actually in some of these difficult environments. How do you build the empathy for people in some of these most vulnerable conditions that we're actually facing on a day-to-day basis. And then based on these boot camps, we also do a pitch day that we actually broadcast live on the World Food Program Facebook page. Then we actually also select the best teams and the best projects from inside the World Food Program. And then the main acceleration program, what we call the Sprint program, we provide right now $50,000 to $100,000 in terms of funding, hands-on support from the team here from the accelerator. So people working here are either prior entrepreneurs from private sector or have implemented innovations in the field. And then afterwards, and this support is for a 3 to 6 month period, and at every 3 months we do a hard review of is the project on track, yes or no, and should we continue the sprint. And after the 6 month mark, we're essentially assessing of is the trajectory of this so positive that it's able to really transform or disrupt hunger, or is it just something that graduates into a normal project, or maybe it has had a failure and so it shouldn't actually be pursued. And so for that we then have what we call an acceleration fund, and we're actually fundraising for that right now for people who are interested in supporting those projects like the blockchain example, and actually help these projects that we have shown that they work, help them scale.
That's a great one. How many of the ideas that come into the accelerator do you ultimately cull? Is it 10% that you ultimately say, hey, thanks, but no thanks? Is it 20%? Or have you found thus far that most of them make it through?
Sorry, you mean from the project that apply or from the project that we support?
Let's say both. It'd be great to know, if you receive 100 applications, how many of them do you accept? But then, we're always interested in, at least on this podcast, having that hard reality kind of conversation of saying, hey, you know what? This looked like a great idea, but we don't see it going anywhere. Thanks, but no thanks.
So far, every year, we've actually done an internal World Food Program, internal innovation challenge. So in the last time, we actually had 250 innovations that were submitted from across the globe, just inside the World Food Program. And we did the external challenge with Singularity University. We also had 150 innovations and startups that applied. And at each round of them, we will support between 5 and 10 of those startups or ideas only. And then I think so far of the projects, part of that I actually would also say that the accelerator actually helps in making some of these projects more successful or avoids them failing completely. I think we haven't had a complete failure in such a shape yet, but clearly, so from the 28 projects that we've supported so far, right now there's 5 that we are really excited about, and the others are actually may just be on a slower growth trajectory. But we'll see. I think one of the interesting aspects of innovation is that it's sometimes you have a gut feeling about what it is, but it is actually a matter of fact. It's as much about the team and the people as it is about the idea itself.
For sure. And one of the conversations we love to have on this podcast is breaking the mold of the bureaucratic sort of UN agency, or breaking the mold of, development assistance, humanitarian assistance in general, and just going through the iterative process. I'm sure within the accelerator is exciting as well. Are you experiencing that as well, where someone will come with an idea or a team will come with an idea, and as they get in the accelerator, it really evolves into something completely different? Or have you had any of those aha moments yet?
I would actually say that as a quality check, most of those teams should actually really evolve their innovation. It should change a lot while they're doing it. And this is one of the principles of applying human-centered design and lean startup thinking. It's actually, obviously you need to have a product vision of some sort, but you have to work and develop it with the real people that are ultimately affected or actually suffering from that particular problem that you're trying to solve. And by doing that, you always actually come across things that you hadn't considered before. You would be surprised to actually learn about that. Like we had other projects where, for instance, we used real-time data monitoring for a mother and child health nutrition program. So that's where, for instance, like mothers with their children will go to a health clinic, and actually based on the assessment by the doctor, they'll get a conditional like voucher to actually buy a special nutritious food. And for instance, that was one of the best examples where also like the team, it was a staff member from our El Salvador country office. They submitted the idea in the first place. Then afterwards, with our support, they also teamed up with an external startup. And throughout the process of the 6 months, actually really took that idea from, well, maybe we should have an SMS-based service, or maybe we should have an app, to develop a smartphone-based like monitoring system that turns out not only to save money, and thereby we're able to cover up to 20% more children with the same amount of money in El Salvador. But at the same time, there's side benefit in this case where all of a sudden the real-time data allows not only us, but also the government now to see on a day-to-day basis how the health status of the population is improving, which is something that you wouldn't have considered necessarily when you started the project.
Now, you as an individual, you came from Boston Consulting Group. You've done a couple startups yourself. The accelerator that you're now the head of is a year old. I'm sure that you came with some preconceived ideas about how this would work and what kind of solutions, applications, innovations would come out of it. What have you learned in the last year? What has the accelerator learned in the last year about maybe how you need to tweak your system or some unexpected outcomes that you weren't looking for?
So when we first started, we also had the idea that maybe we just co-locate the teams as like the private sector startup accelerators do, and have like a lot of the cross-fertilization from across the teams from one to another.
This is like a Y Combinator or something like that.
Like a Y Combinator type of model, exactly. And like, so we do apply the same processes, but we realize that the teams actually have to be co-located wherever their user is or the people who have the problem that they're trying to solve. That's why the teams that we're supporting are then based in South Sudan, in Lebanon, in Jordan, in Cambodia, in El Salvador. And that's really one of the things that we realized. It's when you are trying to solve problems in developing countries, be placed where the problem is and where the users are. And that also meant that we actually shifted our operating model to a certain extent. So in the beginning, didn't actually plan to have as many people on the team here, but right now it's actually the team members from the accelerators that then join the startups or the teams on the ground. And then we'll keep on pushing for the 3 to 6 month period on the ground, and really, depending on what skill set needs reinforcement, either the tech entrepreneur type of skill set or the developing country innovation type of skill set, we can add that kind of additional support to make those projects successful.
How many of your projects are tech focused? I mean, I'm wondering, we have a penchant, especially in today's age, hey, let's build an app for that, or, let's build a website, or let's get a database going for that. I've seen on your website as well, though, that you have agriculturists, you have, food science people. Can you give us a breakdown of, are you really looking at a true broad spectrum of different types of innovation? Maybe you could give us some examples of things that aren't an app.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I think we are looking into all sorts of innovations, just that in reality, so far, most of the innovation aspects of the projects and startups that we've seen are either coming from a technology angle or they use a new business model. And I think that's an interesting aspect, particularly when you think about like traditional humanitarian assistance or development aid, where it's based on a donation model. So the specific areas that we're excited about are the ones that hopefully will lead to sustainability or a sustainable business model, or a for-profit company that can actually operate that. And maybe to give you an example of an innovation that we've supported, but that isn't necessarily tech-oriented, like it's called the Post-Harvest Losses Eradication Project. So it's actually using an airtight silo to reduce post-harvest losses. So you can imagine it's a plastic silo or a metal silo the size of a fridge, and you can store grains in there. The project actually was started before the accelerator was started, so like the first version of it. And the team said, well, post-harvest losses typically in a country like Uganda make up between 40 and 50%. So 40 to 50% of the grain is actually getting lost. Yes, exactly.
That's amazing. I had no idea that was that high.
No, and so when they're using like very simple techniques like this airtight silo, they can actually bring that number down to like just 1 to 2%. And with the silo, So we've done like agricultural training and training everybody on like different sorts of agricultural techniques for decades. Why don't we try something different? And what they did is, one is they manufactured the silo locally in a semi-manufacturing model with local first artisans and then manufacturers. Secondly, instead of giving it away for free, they were selling the silos with a small subsidy. And thirdly, they were actually testing the different selling or distribution models. So we're selling it through NGOs, through private sector companies, and through startups. And by that, they were able to sell over 80,000 of those in the first year alone in Uganda. And this is a massive size of like really changing people's lives, because we know from actually studies that people who have that silo can triple their household income. And even in this particular case, they're cash positive after the first harvest, which means that the cash out that they have to buy the silo, they will actually make it back already after the first harvest.
That's a fantastic, positive story. Tell me about some of the biggest hurdles that you've found. What are some of the typical hurdles that people find or that the groups find when they come into your program about what they need to overcome?
I'd actually say that a lot of the teams that are coming like either traditionally from like having worked in developing countries for years, they oftentimes don't have the knowledge or the access to like the latest technologies, or like knowing how to actually then, how do I build a system or technology that is scalable? How should I actually do that? Similarly, when you look into external startups or new small NGO startups or academia teams, they oftentimes lack the knowledge of how life or like circumstances are actually in developing countries. Now, there's easier things that you can tell people, like, okay, connectivity may not always be there, or it may not be constant. But then there's also like subtle things, like how you actually can move things along. And in the blockchain example, I think it's actually a perfect example of how you can balance out things that, as an accelerator, that have been missing on a team. So it was, the original idea came from a colleague of ours, our finance team, Human Haddad. He is actually in the finance team. So his day-to-day job was to make sure that actually money is being transferred, and so that these cash-based transfers work. And he saw that problem and also the opportunity to actually using blockchain. Now, actually teaming him up with a colleague from the accelerator who has more of the human-centered design experience, and then an external startup that's the blockchain expert. I think that was the perfect match of actually having all the critical skill sets on the team. And I think this is where, like in particular, looking into the hurdles of teams, I think that having a balanced team with all the critical skill sets is something that's not as easily achievable.
No, I really appreciate that example about how it all came together. And I hope that it's inspirational to other people, in that you don't have to be the tech person, right? You don't have to be an individual who knows how to write blockchain in order to get something done.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's unrealistic. So like if people are not the blockchain expert, I think you can still, if you're interested in the space, get the exposure, learn as much as you can. If people have had like 20 years of experience in developing countries, and they have no knowledge about actually how you develop or code, I think it's unrealistic to assume that you now become the blockchain coding expert.
Oh, come on. I can just pick it up tomorrow. That's what I do.
Yes, maybe.
So I've noticed, again, doing sort of background research for this, many of the individuals and teams that you're working right now have come from World Food Program. They're either internal colleagues who have an idea, and rightly so, right? These are people who've been focused on hunger for a while, and they know the problems on the ground. Is there any other way that you're reaching out? And I know other people come from outside WFP. Do you coordinate with other UN agencies? Do you have advertising events or those kinds of things, or moments when you're saying, hey, we're really waving the flag, we want new ideas to come, or is it just a rolling basis?
We do accept applications on a rolling basis, and like we have different cutoff points during the year when we also then invite teams to like the boot camps or the sprint program. To be fair, we applied the same innovation principle to ourselves, like using the lean startup model. We started off with like working with internal teams first, and then afterwards, actually now, as I was saying earlier, we actually did the first pure external startup challenge together with Singularity University, and then we actually had a bootcamp with 11 for-profit startups, and that was the first time we had just only external startups. And I think from now on, we'll actually always have a mix between internal and external teams. To be fair, I must say, historically now, the 28 projects that we've supported so far, they're always an internal WFP owner and an external partner. It could be a for-profit startup, non-profit startup, NGO, for-profit company, or an academia team. Actually, nobody so far has just worked alone. So like it's always that mix between an external entity and an internal one.
Are you finding that they, after launch, organizations or ideas are then going and seeking more funding and that's part of their business model? Or is the expectation that they have a business model that has a sustainability function straight out of the gate?
Well, ideally, they would have a sustainability of one shape or form, either that is attractive for a traditional donor to fund, or it's a profitable business idea that could actually be spun off, or somebody could take this on. To a certain extent, it's unrealistic given the challenges that you have in developing those ideas. And there are challenges, and let's be frank about that. Even when you take the example of connectivity, for instance, it's right now, already every second person on this planet has internet connection. So in some countries like Kenya, it's 46%, Colombia, it's actually 56%. So even in developing countries, like internet access of the general population is actually already quite high, and it's going to increase further. But when you think about that, there are lots of challenges, even when you're thinking about how do you actually scale those things. It's not that every single smallholder farmer in a developing country will have a smartphone at this stage. Whether that's something that should be actually a goal is a separate question, but like when you're thinking about, like, for instance, scaling your innovations, you have to plan and take these points into consideration. The same as like transport capacity or road network, for instance. So like I think there's particular challenges, and so I think it's understandable that some of the sustainability questions can only be solved over some time, but it should be on the horizon somehow.
I just want to, inject a point that's something that we've learned definitely on the podcast over the last couple of years as well, is that it's easy to get hung up on sustainability as something that you solve and then it just goes away. As you've mentioned with many of your startups and your past experience, it's a constant evolving process. You have to continue to be out there. You've got to be growing. You've got to be evolving. You've got to be always selling, right? So it's nice to have a good business model, but you have to keep pushing. Otherwise, it just won't happen.
Absolutely. And it's also something that is not as easily achievable. Like if it were so easy, then you'd assume that somebody would have done it already.
Absolutely. And they would have written that book and they would be ultimately sustainable, right? Because they would have made $1 billion. So how has the advent of the accelerator being in existence, has it changed WFP at all? Have you seen sort of that backward looking or the feedback maybe that is coming out of your program? Has it started to change normal processes or ways that WFP works?
I do hope so. And I think in general terms, one of the aspects that we've definitely also achieved is to broaden the message of what innovation actually brings to the table and what it can achieve, and like actually getting more people thinking about that and actually broadening like the conversation inside of the World Food Program. I think it has also contributed not only inside the World Food Program, but externally, be it our traditional partners or also private sector companies, or even when you take tech companies, to have a meaningful conversation about like what innovation can actually achieve. And now the blockchain example is a good one because it's actually a very early stage technology that we are now successfully using. And you wouldn't necessarily assume that you could use that in an emergency assistance type of scenario, but we actually do.
If you look at the next 2 or 3 years for how the accelerator is going to continue to evolve, I know you mentioned that you're fundraising for a new aspect of the accelerator. What are the different ways that you see yourself evolving or growing as a unit within WFP?
One aspect for sure is that as we're seeing some of these projects maturing and actually growing, I do hope that if on average we support, let's say, 15 to 20 projects per year, that we'll have, let's say, 3 to 5 projects that really scale, and with scale I mean reach at least 100,000 people and change their lives positively. And so I think ideally we will see that we not only are able to support like some of these early ideas to get them to results, but also to actually make a significant difference. And this is where I think as our vision should be. If we really want to achieve a world without hunger, definitely there have to be some prerequisites that have to be in place. Okay, where there's war, the wars have to be ended. There's certain aspects that are kind of outside now the accelerator's control. But what we can contribute is we can actually help those innovations that really have this disruptive potential that can transform the fight against hunger, and getting those to not only stay at this small test level and pilot level, but really get them to scale. And I think for the next 2 to 3 years, we'll actually see whether we're able to get those innovations across the journey, or maybe we'll find out that we just need to tweak the model even further.
Bernhard, I have two questions that I always ask at the end of every interview here on our innovation series, and I'm very interested to hear what your answers might be. But as the head of an accelerator, especially the World Food Program, who do you pay attention to, obviously other than, the organizations that come into the accelerator, about how you stay up to date? Are there personalities? Are there blog feeds? Are there Twitter feeds, Instagram accounts that you're paying attention to stay up to date and to get fresh ideas that you think would be helpful to our listeners?
So there probably should say is we do have partnerships with Singularity University in Silicon Valley, and also we are collaborating with the X Prize, both right now the Learning X Prize in Tanzania and most recently on the Artificial Intelligence X Prize. So I would say, like, in terms of just staying up to date with the cutting edge technologies and business model, Singularity University and their research are definitely a good inspiration for thinking beyond just what's happening right now or in 1 year, but what are really those technologies that could take off and really transform the societies and the world that we live in. Other than that, I think I would also actually look into some of the realities that are happening. So like, for instance, in the developing world, like DevX as one of the highlights that actually we'll talk about. And then classically, like, get inspiration from startups, like reading some of the startup magazines, also like, Fast Company, Inc., TechCrunch as online resources or even offline. I think that can give you lots of inspiration also of what people choose to do. And it may not always be maybe not fighting poverty, maybe not fighting hunger, and maybe they are just creating a new app for taxis. But you can actually learn from that too. Like, obviously, if you find some of the celebrities or some of the personas, like, it's very easy to say, well, we all just have to work like this and that person. And I think it's too easy an answer to say, like, well, we all have to mirror that specific person's way of life or way of working. I'd actually look into more inspiration that also, like, even for the World Food Program, like, when you see some of the personal stories of some of the people that actually work for our organization and really see what it is, what it means to actually be able to change and influence people's lives to the better, I think that's personally something that really inspires me also.
My last question for you is, you are in a privileged position. You get to see new ideas and hear from creative teams all the time. Is there something coming down the pipe or an idea or an innovation that you're super, super excited about that you don't think gets enough attention, or maybe it's a technology or a process that you think could be the next big thing that you'd like to give a shout out to?
So definitely one of the areas that will significantly impact the world we live in, both in developed and in developing countries, is artificial intelligence. And I think this is the area specifically for fighting hunger when you think about it. Right now, we may not use technology for certain aspects, and also maybe not in developing countries because it's too expensive. But certain things like providing precision forecasts for weather or for harvesting, like that may become just a staple for everybody. And I think this is something that also really excites me, thinking about the positive reinforcement and the positive potential, including connectivity, right? Because when you think about connectivity, all of a sudden, everybody on this planet will be able to actually participate in the global digital economy. And it doesn't matter whether you're based in Silicon Valley, New York, Africa, or in Asia, anywhere. You could literally be somewhere in a remote village, somewhere in Eastern Chad. As long as you have internet access, you're actually able to participate in the global economy and have access to like the global learning resources.
Bernhard, this has been a fantastic conversation. Thank you so much for being a guest on the show today.
Thank you so much, Steven. Thank you for the opportunity.
Hey guys, can you take 30 seconds and give the show a rating on iTunes or whatever podcast app you happen to be using? And if you really enjoyed the show, share it with others on Facebook or Twitter. And of course, you can always contact me at aidpreneur.com. Thanks. You've been listening to the Terms of Reference podcast from aidpreneur.com. Subscribe to us on iTunes.